If you think the only way to get a semi-truck that will last is to spend big on something newer, this list might ruin that idea fast. Because out in the real world, some of the cheapest used rigs on the market are only cheap because nobody gets excited about them anymore. Not because they are done. They are old, rough around the edges, and usually ignored in favor of trucks that look better on paper. But some of these forgotten workhorses still have the kind of durability, mechanical simplicity, and proven drivetrains that can keep them earning long after newer trucks start turning into expensive rolling electronics projects. So in this countdown, we are looking at 5 dirt cheap used semi-trucks nobody really wants, but that can still outlast a lot of newer rigs if you buy the right one. And if you like honest truck content without the nonsense, subscribe to Smart Buy Motors and let's get into it. At number 5, the Sterling A9500. This truck is the mechanical equivalent of a plain white work boot. Nobody buys it because it looks exciting. Nobody brags about owning one. And that is exactly why you can still stumble into an A9500 for the kind of money that makes newer truck payments look mildly offensive. Sterling never had the badge prestige. That hurt it when new, and it absolutely destroys its resale value now. But if you look past the badge, what you are often getting is a truck with a lot of familiar Freightliner DNA underneath, which matters more than the logo on the hood when something breaks on a Tuesday and you need parts by Wednesday. For a budget buyer, that familiarity is gold. The A9500 was built to be a fleet tool, not a personality statement. That means simple layouts, straightforward controls, and none of that weird engineering that makes you wonder whether the truck was designed by mechanics or by people who have only seen mechanics in brochures. And when you find one with a Detroit Series 60 or another proven old-school power plant that has already earned the respect of half the diesel world, the value starts getting hard to ignore. What keeps the Sterling on this list is not charm. It is the fact that it can be brutally honest transportation. It is cheap because the market never loved it, not because every example is junk. In fact, the best ones have already done exactly what they were supposed to do for years: pull loads, eat miles, and stay understandable. That last part matters. Older Sterlings do not scare experienced diesel techs. They do not turn every diagnosis into a software seance. When something goes wrong, there is a decent chance it is still a truck problem, not a mystery novel. Now, this is not the truck you buy because you want admiration at the fuel island. You buy it because you want a usable highway tractor with a real shot at long-term service. If the previous owner did not treat maintenance like a personal insult, it is overlooked, underloved, and still more honest than a lot of much newer equipment. Which, for this title, is exactly the point. At number 4, the Volvo V&L 670 and 780, especially the older D12 trucks. Now here is where some people immediately get suspicious, because Volvo has never been the favorite answer from the old school crowd that thinks every good truck should feel like a brick with air brakes. But the older V&L, particularly with the D12, earned its reputation the hard way, by running huge miles in real fleet service and refusing to die just because fashion moved on. Why are these so cheap now? Easy. They are old fleet sleepers. They have miles. They have a brand image that some buyers still treat like a debate topic. And a lot of drivers shopping old trucks are terrified of anything that feels even slightly more modern than a square-nosed relic from the late 90s. That fear keeps prices down, sometimes way down. But the V&L has a few things going for it that matter more in the long run than its resale stigma. First, it was built for the road. These trucks were made to live on the interstate, not just pose on it. They tend to ride well, the cabins are genuinely comfortable for an older truck, visibility is usually excellent, and the whole package makes long days feel less like punishment. When you are buying a cheap work truck, driver fatigue and day-to-day comfort are not luxury concerns. The other advantage is livability. A cheap truck that rides well, sees well, and feels decent after a long day is far more likely to stay useful instead of becoming a parked headache. They affect whether the truck remains tolerable to live with. Then there is the engine question. The older D12 is one of the big reasons these trucks still have a loyal following. It is not some mythical, invincible unicorn, but it is widely respected for being durable, smooth, and capable of stacking very serious miles when maintained properly. In a market crowded with used trucks that look cheaper than they are, an old V&L with the right history can actually be a sneaky smart buy. And yes, you do have to be picky. A neglected old Volvo can become an electrical trust exercise you did not ask for. But that is true of almost any aging truck. The difference is that a good V&L still gives you a lot of truck for the money, especially if your priorities are highway manners, sleeper comfort, and a powertrain combination that mechanics do not immediately run from. Nobody wants these like they want a long hood Kenworth or a classic Peterbilt. Exactly. That is why they belong here. The market discounts them harder than it should, and smart buyers have been quietly taking advantage of that for years. At number 3, the Mack CH613. If the Sterling is the plain white work boot, the Mack CH613 is the steel-toe boot that already looks like it has seen 3 winters and does not care. This thing has never depended on beauty, and it has definitely never depended on trendiness. But if your definition of value includes words like rugged, overbuilt, and tractor-shaped piece of stubbornness, the CH613 deserves real respect. One reason these get ignored is simple: they feel old even when they are not that old. The styling is blunt. The interior is usually more functional than inviting, and compared with the newer aerodynamic trucks that took over fleets, a CH613 can look like it belongs to a different era entirely. For the used market, that is bad for popularity and great for pricing. The payoff is in the way these trucks were built. The CH613 came from a period when Mack still leaned hard into durability, and that shows in the bones of the truck. A good one feels solid, in a way many newer, lighter, more efficiency-obsessed tractors simply do not. It is not trying to impress you with digital polish. More importantly, the CH613 usually feels solid the moment you climb in. It does not feel delicate, and in the cheap truck world, that first impression often tells you a lot. It is trying to survive, and in this conversation, surviving is a more useful talent. The real sweet spot is a CH with the old Mack E7. That engine has a long-standing reputation for toughness and for taking abuse better than a lot of people expect. It is one of those engines that diesel guys mention with a certain tone, not because it is perfect, but because it earned credibility out in the world where loads are heavy, schedules are ugly, and ideal conditions are mostly fictional. Pair that with a manual transmission and a truck that has not been butchered by years of deferred maintenance, and suddenly you have a very serious old-school workhorse for bargain money. What also helps the CH613 is that it tends to attract the wrong kind of used buyer less often. It was never the glamorous rig, never the truck the style-first crowd chased, and never the king of polished owner-operator fantasy that can actually work in your favor. When a truck spent its life being bought for work instead of image, there is at least a chance it got treated like a tool, not an accessory. Of course, this is not the truck for everyone. The ride can feel more truck-like in the old-fashioned sense, and if you want airy luxury, this is not your answer. But if you want something with real backbone, something that still feels engineered around doing a job instead of pleasing a spreadsheet, the CH613 can make newer rigs look oddly fragile by comparison. And that is what makes it such a classic nobody wants it pick. It is not the cool kid. It is the tough kid who stayed after school and somehow still owns the building. At number 2, the Freightliner Columbia 120 with the Detroit Series 60. This truck is almost unfair for a list like this, because if you know trucks, you already know why it is here. The Columbia has spent years being one of the most unromantic but rational used truck buys in America. It is not rare. It is not sexy. It will never become poster material. But if your mission is to buy cheap, run hard, and avoid drama where possible, the Columbia keeps raising its hand like the one employee in the company who actually read the manual. The reason nobody gets excited about one is the exact reason value hunters should. It is a fleet icon, which means there are a lot of them. They got used hard, and the market is full of buyers who would rather overpay for a badge than buy the truck that quietly did 1 million highway miles while nobody was looking. Supply keeps prices low, snobbery keeps them lower. And then there's the dream pairing, Freightliner Columbia, Detroit Series 60, manual transmission. That combo is basically catnip for buyers who care more about proven service life than impressing strangers. The Series 60 is one of the most respected heavy-duty diesel engines ever dropped into a highway tractor. It has the kind of reputation newer engines spend their whole lives trying to inherit. Smooth, durable, widely understood, and backed by generations of mechanics who have seen every version of its good habits and bad habits. That matters because longevity is not just about whether an engine is strong. It is also about whether people know how to keep it alive without needing a small committee and a laptop card. The Columbia benefits from that same logic throughout the truck. Parts are common. Knowledge is common. Familiarity is everywhere. The truck world understands these things. The Columbia is also old enough that the industry already knows its habits. That matters. Unknown problems are expensive. Known problems are manageable. And when the truck world understands a platform, ownership gets easier. Now, let us be honest. Plenty of Columbias on the market are tired. Some are beyond tired. Some look like they spent the last decade negotiating peace treaties between neglect and desperation. But the good ones are still out there, and when you find one that was maintained like a working asset instead of a disposable appliance, the value can be ridiculous. This is the kind of truck that owner-operators sometimes buy almost apologetically, then end up respecting far more than they expected. Because once you get over the fact that it is a Columbia and not some romantic long-nosed legend, what you are left with is a truck that can still earn its keep year after year, which, frankly, is a lot more useful than image. And that brings us to number 1, the Kenworth T600. This is the truck that proves looks can lie in both directions. Because when the T600 first showed up, a lot of people thought it looked strange. Too aerodynamic, too rounded, too different from the long hood classics that defined what a proper American truck was supposed to look like. And decades later, that awkward reputation still hangs over it just enough to keep prices softer than they should be, especially compared with the more idolized Kenworths. That is exactly why the T600 wins this list. Underneath the styling that some buyers still treat like an unresolved family argument, the T600 can be an absolute tank in the right spec. This truck became a genuine workhorse because it married old-school durability with a more efficient shape before the rest of the market fully caught up. It was built to work, built to live on the highway, and in the best engine combinations, built to survive astonishing amounts of use. The versions people really chase are the ones with proven engines like the Cummins N14, Cat C15, or Detroit Series 60, depending on year and setup. Get one with a solid manual box, decent maintenance history, and no catastrophic stories hiding in the paperwork, and you may have just bought one of the smartest cheap semis on the market. Not the prettiest, not the flashiest, but possibly the one most likely to make you look clever 6 months later. And the T600 has something else that a lot of other cheap trucks do not quite match. It still feels like a real driver's truck. The cab layout works, the visibility is good. The road manners are better than many older square front rigs. Veteran drivers often describe the T600 the same way. They may not have loved the shape, but they respected the result. That kind of reputation ages extremely well. And because it is a Kenworth, there is still a certain baseline seriousness to the whole experience that owners appreciate once the novelty of badge worship wears off and the practical part of their brain takes the wheel. What really pushes the T600 to number 1, though, is the contradiction at the heart of it. This is a truck with real pedigree that the market still discounts because it never got the poster truck treatment. It is too old for mainstream buyers, too funny looking for image buyers, and too sensible for people who shop with their ego first. That leaves a sweet spot for the kind of buyer who understands the difference between desirable and dependable. And dependable is the word that matters here. Because if you are shopping dirt cheap used semis, you are not looking for a toy. You are looking for something that can absorb miles, tolerate real work, and keep making sense after the purchase high wears off. The T600, more than any other truck on this list, nails that brief. It is the ugly genius of old highway tractors. Overlooked, undervalued, and very capable of embarrassing newer rigs that cost a whole lot more and somehow deliver a whole lot more downtime. That is the real lesson with all 5 of these trucks. The used market does not only price condition, It prices fashion, badge snobbery, outdated reputations, and whatever people think looks good in a thumbnail. But freight does not care about any of that. Work does not care. Profit definitely does not care. So if you know what to inspect, if you buy the right engine and transmission combo, and if you leave enough room in the budget to fix what the last owner ignored, one of these old misfit semis can be a far smarter buy than a newer truck that looks impressive right up until the warning lights start a full-time relationship with your dashboard. If you enjoyed this countdown, subscribe to Smart Buy Motors for more no-nonsense truck and car content. Because sometimes the smartest buy is the one everybody else was too busy laughing at.